this lesson, we're going to talk about saddles and how to put your saddle correctly on your horse. But before we actually talk about the saddles themselves, we want to talk about some of the other stuff that has to go with the saddle, like your pad and your girth. And Ruth and I are just going to show you, just like we did with the bits and the reins, just a sample of the different types of pads that are out there and the different types of girths that are out there before we actually go through the saddling process. So these are basic pads that we have here, and you'll notice that this pad is raised in the front. It allows the horse to have some clearance for his withers so that there's no pressure on the withers. That's very important. And then depending on the type of saddle that you have, notice that this is cut back, because when you have your pad put on correctly, optically there should be about 1 inch of pad in the front of the front flap. You don't want to have like 3 inches showing in front of the flap. So depending on how your particular saddle is cut, you might need a basic pad like this that makes sure that you don't have any wither pressure, but you have that nice line. So I'm going to give you that there. And this is similar because it doesn't have the wither pressure. It allows for this raised part to stay off the withers of the horse. But notice this is a straight cut, so this would go for a straight cut saddle. Now, oftentimes, I like either one of these pads just as a basic pad, but a lot of times I see these just square pads for dressage, and I don't like these pads because notice it's completely straight across the top. And this is the type of saddle, let me have your left arm, that if you put this pad on, it's going to have direct pressure down on the horse's withers and can make him very sore. So I always like a pad that is raised in front.
Let me just say another thing about when you're picking out any of them. When you're picking out your pad for your saddle, Jane talked about the front having about 1 inch or so of width. You also want your saddle pad long enough. I see that often, that sometimes the back of the saddle is actually sitting on the seam. Just imagine how it would be if you had that wrinkle in your sock. So it's got to be long enough, and I like to have 2 or 3 or 4 inches of pad behind my saddle. And the other piece that we also talk about is the depth of your pad. If it's too short from here to here, when you put your billet or your girth through the buckles, it's going to bunch up and get underneath and cause havoc with the skin underneath his side. It also should hang down 1 inch or so below your saddle line, but not so low that it gets in between your calf and the horse, because you want to have direct contact from your boot from just below your knee. If your saddle pad is halfway down your calf, it's too long and your horse is having a dampened effect to your leg aids. So length and depth as well.
That's great. And I just want to make a comment about the length. I like what you said. 3
to 4 inches.
4 inches. I have, when I'm showing, I have had in the past a horse with a really, really long back. So for a horse like that, I'll buy an extra long pad because where it ends on his back, it sort of optically cuts his back and gives that optical illusion that his back is not so quite long. So long.
Yeah, that's a good trick. Okay, what would you like to see next?
This is, I want to just talk about this pad, which is raised a little bit in front. It could be raised a little bit more. But notice that it's got this kind of rubbery material.
It's sort of sticky feeling.
Yeah, and what I like about this type of pad, 2 things, is that it stays in place. This stickiness here helps it stay in place. And also, if I can get you to hold this again, notice the difference between the keeper here and right here. This is separated by stitching, so you can put your billets of your saddle into wherever you want so that you just have that 1 inch in front. But this also helps keep the pad in place so that it doesn't slip back. So that's what I like about this one. And then we have You know, in a perfect world, you have the perfect saddle that fits your horse absolutely perfectly, but sometimes that doesn't happen, and we always want the horse to be as comfortable as possible. So we have some things that you can use to adjust your saddle so it fits more comfortably on your horse. So this is an interesting, very dense foam type pad, and notice that it's wider in the front than it is in the back, and that allows the front of the saddle to stay up off the horse's withers a little bit better. And here's another type of both protection and comfort. This is called a gel pad, and a lot of people like this. It reduces concussion. Notice that it's in a little cover so you can keep it clean. It's easy to throw the cover in the wash, but this is a very cushy gel pad that's very, very popular as far as making sure that there's an even distribution of your saddle on the horse's
Here, I'll
back.
put that away
Thanks,
for you.
that would be great. I appreciate that. Now, we have two types of Mattis pads here, and you'll notice, can you hold that one? That the main difference between the two pads here is that this one has the fluffy stuff on the back as well as in the front. Now this pad, I like these pads. They really are comfortable for the horse. They give a lot of cushioning, a lot of support. They wick away moisture. And this pad in particular, you can put this pad directly on your horse's back with your standard pad over it. But you can't do that with this pad because you see this fluffy part in the back would get in the way. So this would go between your saddle pad and your saddle. So these are pads that you can use if your saddle doesn't quite fit your horse correctly, or if you feel that your horse needs a little more cushioning. They're sensitive in the back, and that would make them more comfortable. Now this is another type of pad that also has some cushioning, but this is a little bit different in that the pad itself is made so that you can put the cushioning inside. We have this nice honeycomb type cushioning inside, and you can see that there are holes. It breathes very well. You can see these tiny little holes all throughout, and it's nice and cushy. It gives the horse some support and some cushion. Anything else? We don't have any other pads. Would you like to add anything
the only
to that?
thing I like to add is that, you know, you said you like the Mattis pads. I do too, and this one happens to be one that goes on my sensitive mare. And it just helps her back. It gives my saddle a nice seat. But the important thing to think about is that if you prefer to ride with these, you need to have your saddle fit with the pad.
Oh, good point.
Right? Because sometimes we need to use these other kinds of pads for an ill-adjusted saddle that hopefully you're going to fix. But I like the way this feels under my seat, and so does my mare. So when I have my saddle guy come out, I put this on with my saddle, because if he fit it without the pad, and then I put the pad on and then my saddle, it's going to be too tight in the vise or in the withers.
Yeah.
Okay, so however it is that you like to sit on, or whatever kind of pad you use, that's what needs to be used when your saddle is fit. Okay, so that's
really
just an
good
addition.
point. Yeah. So, all right, we have pads. We've talked about different kinds of pads.
Okay.
Can you maybe talk about some girths? Here, let me bring
Happy to.
some girths over here for you.
Okay, there's so many different types of
Yeah.
girths, like bits and like reins and like everything else. So again, it's going to be what your horse likes and what you like. Now, this is one of the kinds of girths that I use on a lot of my horses. It's a contoured girth. I hope you can see it with my brown bridges. But it's got a shape to it. It's got a nice curve to it so that the elbows fit in these little gaps, and the wider band under the belly is actually more comfortable for the horse because it has more surface area. The other thing that's really important is that you have elastic on both sides of your girth. Okay, if you have elastic on one side and not on the other, you're going to have give. Your saddle might slip to that side, and it also is just more even pressure. Again, we've said that so many times in tacking up your horse, but even pressure. The third thing that's really important is the buckles need to have a roller on it. Now, that's not anything to do for comfort for your horse, but it is with ease of tightening your girth, and it also saves your billets so that you don't have to have your billets replaced so often, because if this is rolling, it's not cutting into your billet strap, okay?
Yeah, good point.
So this is one definition, one example of a contoured girth, and I think this one is quite similar to the one we just saw, but this one has a little bit cushier pad to it. You can feel that. It feels a little squishier underneath the shape, so maybe a sensitive skinned horse, or maybe a horse that tends to get a girth gall. I would choose a pad with a little bit more cushion.
A girth with a little more cushion.
I'm sorry, a girth with more cushion. Now this one is also contoured, but you can see that it has a bulge more on one side than the other. Now this is a really great girth for a lot of reasons. It has elastic on both sides. It has nice keepers for my billets. It has the roller on the end. It also has a really nice place to tuck the top of the billet in. So often you see the top of the girth askew from where the billets are coming down. Now this one, I love this a lot, but I see this girth put on wrong all the time, okay? You can see that at first glance, you might want to put it under the horse's belly with this pointing forward, because there's a little gap there. There's a little place, but this is not where the elbow goes. The elbow is going to go in the biggest gap, okay? So this part of the girth, if the horse was right here, this would be pointing back. This is the biggest section underneath the belly. It goes back towards the haunches. So the elbows fit here, and this comes farther underneath the abdomen, and a nice wide section for better surface area and no pinching. Okay, so this is also a girth for a sensitive horse, or maybe a saddle that slips. It really helps because it's so wide underneath the horse.
Okay, we have more comfort things coming up here, so let's talk about that.
So these are different examples of different material that works really well. This is a neoprene. It feels a little plasticky. It whisks away sweat. It doesn't build up bacteria, and you throw it in the wash bucket or hose it off. It's not made of leather, so it's very, very easy to keep clean. This one does happen to have rollers. It does not have elastic. So if I have a sensitive sided horse or a cold-backed horse, wouldn't be going on that because it has no elastic. But I do like, for some horses that tend to get fungus and things, very good because it can be kept so clean so easily. So I'll toss that off. This is sort of the old-fashioned string type girth that I had on all my horses when I was a kid, and you know, they've kind of gone out of fashion, but they're really good girths. They do have a small sense of flexibility to them, so they don't need to have a big elastic on the end. But the biggest thing for me is that if I have a horse that tends to get really big girth balls or sores right behind the elbow with the skin pinching, this seems to solve the trick on these type of horses.
Any sensitive thoroughbred type horse that I've had, this has always done the trick for me.
Yep, and you know, just when I have the kids tacking up at home, we just make sure there's no twists to it. I have seen girths being put on like this. Well, for sure you can. It's harder to do that with a leather girth. They all come out, but you do have to pay attention that you have a nice, smooth, no twists with a string girth. Now this one is a great solution for if you have a girth, and if you could pull this off just a little bit. This is a totally straight girth, okay? This girth has its elastic in the middle. And that's absolutely fine. It doesn't need to be on the end. This gives even pressure, but it's totally straight. There's no contour at all. So this happens to go on one of my mares, and this girth fits her well, but she is sensitive under the elbows, so I have solved the problem without buying a whole nother very expensive girth. It's just to put a cover over it that's very cushy. It's got to be kept clean. It goes in the wash, or you can brush it off. But it can solve some problems if you don't want to buy another girth, but your horse has some sensitive sides again.
And I think that, you know, as far as putting on a cover, to get a real sheepskin cover, especially if they
Yeah.
are sensitive. It's important that rather than having a synthetic fleecy thing like
And
this.
this one is, and you can feel that the inside is just, you know, that soft leather. And, you know, we try carefully to brush them off and just to take care of them that way, but you can wash them with like a Murphy's oil soap or something.
Yeah.
So they're very useful.
Yeah.
And then this last one is just another example. This one is sort of a jelly, rubbery neoprene. I don't know what the actual make is, but it feels very jelly, and it's almost fabric-y plastic.
Yeah.
And this also does not have elastic, but this girth feels a little bit soft and stretchy. So this is also, it's an inexpensive girth, and some horses really like it. And what I like about this particular synthetic girth is you see how they've made this gap of this material at the end goes behind the buckles. I really don't like to see buckles on the horse's skin like this, so I always try to choose something that covers underneath, protects the horse's side for the billet straps to go through.
Great. Now you mentioned when we were talking about pads, about the length and the width and how much you want to see underneath the flap. With a dressage saddle with the long billets, what's the rule of thumb as far as the length of the girth that you want to buy?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you want to have the longest girth possible that you can tighten appropriately for the most support, the most even pressure, and the stability of the saddle is really determined. You wouldn't want to put this short girth on a 17 two-hand horse and have all this extra billet. Plus, when the billets come down, and we can show that when we tack up, when the billets come down, you don't want a big gap of just the billet next to the horse's side before the girth. So your girth should come about an inch from your saddle pad at its point where you've tightened the girth to where you're comfortable riding. So longer is better at the appropriate tightness.
Great. All right. So I think that we've done a good job going through some of the
anything
equipment.
else.
And we'll bring a horse out here and we'll talk about putting the pad on and putting the saddle on and adjusting the curve.